Great, and we're live on YouTube. Just gonna share my screen. Great, and we're live on YouTube. There we go. All right, Tessa, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thank you, Madison. And thank you everyone for joining us for our virtual voter engagement information session. This is an opportunity to gather some community input on voting methods and explore how residents may cast their ballot in the 2022 municipal election. This afternoon, we are joined by City of Sault Ste. Marie staff, including Rachel Tazinski, the city clerk, Madison Zupa, deputy city clerk, Nancy Scott, accessibility coordinator, and myself, Tessa Vecchio, communications officer, as your moderator. The purpose of our session today is to provide some broad, neutral information on the local municipal election and alternative voting methods, including benefits and drawbacks of each, and accessibility as it relates to the municipal election. We will then ask you for feedback about the voting methods that the City of Sault Ste. Marie could use in the 2022 municipal election. And it is important for Council to understand what methods voters in Sault Ste. Marie want, what they are comfortable with, and what they can trust. Council does have a requirement to make this decision before May 1st, 2022. So today we are providing you with a lot of information and we welcome your questions. We would like you to provide feedback as well by taking our survey online at saultstemarie.ca/election. We have had over 500 responses so far for the survey, but we are taking feedback until May 15th. Alternatively, you can email comments to election@cityssm.on.ca or phone 705-759-5388. Today we will be taking questions posted in the Q&A section of this Zoom webinar, and we will address them at the end of the presentation. So again, you can also email questions to election@cityssm.on.ca or phone them into 705-759-2745. And finally, I would also like to remind everyone that this is a place and an opportunity for different ideas, perspectives, opinions, and values to come together and share respectfully. Your questions and your insights are needed, and it is important to understand that we cannot share any disrespectful or rude comments or respond to them. So please keep your comments and questions respectful and kind. Our agenda and timeline for today is as follows. We are going to start with a brief presentation from our city clerk, who will provide information on the local municipal election and election principles. Then we are going to move to our deputy city clerk for information on voting methods and the benefits and drawbacks of each. And lastly, we'll move to our accessibility coordinator, who will provide information on accessibility as it relates to the municipal election. The formal portion of our presentation should take about 25 minutes, at which point we will then open it up to questions and answers from you, our valued participants today. I would also like to let everyone know that this particular session is going to be recorded so that we can post this recording for those that aren't able to attend the live stream today. The recording will be available on our city's YouTube channel and on the city's website at saultstemarie.ca/election. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Rachel Tazinski, City Clerk for the City of Sault Ste. Marie. The City Clerk does have a responsibility to serve as a returning officer and Chief Electoral Officer in the administration and delivery of municipal and school board elections. Every Ontario municipality is required to appoint a municipal clerk, And each of those are statutory positions who share the responsibility for delivering elections in their local municipalities. The entire city clerk's office team does play an important and impartial role in delivering election services to our community. With that, I will pass it along to Rachel.
Thank you, Tessa. So municipal elections occur every 4 years, except where a vacancy on council necessitates a by-election in that intervening period. So the next voting day is October 24, 2022. The Municipal Elections Act sets out the regulatory framework for municipal elections, as it is a highly regulated process. Despite, or as well as a lot of regulations in terms of eligibility of voters and notice periods and so on, with respect to this conversation, we wanted to point out that the Municipal Elections Act allows a municipal council to pass bylaws authorizing both the use of voting and vote counting equipment, as well as provides to have the authority to pass a bylaw to provide for the use of an alternative voting method, such as voting by mail or by telephone, that does not require electors to attend at a voting place in order to vote. And the reason we have that in quotation marks in the presentation is because that's the specific wording in the Municipal Elections Act. So while it refers to voting by mail or by telephone, it doesn't specifically say by internet, but municipalities have been interpreting that does not require electors to attend at a voting place in order to vote as authority to pass a bylaw that could authorize the use of internet voting as well as other alternative voting methods. So the principles underlying the Municipal Elections Act are ballot secrecy, so that the secrecy and confidentiality of the voting process is paramount. Fairness, the election should be fair and non-biased. Voters and candidates shall be treated fairly and consistently. Accessibility, the election shall be accessible to the voters, both in terms of physical accessibility as well as tools that we might use to create a barrier-free process. Integrity, the integrity of the voting process shall be maintained throughout the election. Certainty, there's certainty that the results of the election reflect the votes that are cast. And eligibility, that is that valid votes are counted and invalid votes are rejected so far as is reasonably possible. And we do always point out that the onus is always on the voter at the end of the day in terms of eligibility and personal compliance with the legislation. So this initiative for both voter engagement and to gain insights into the voting public's understanding of alternative voting methods and preferences has stemmed from there was a council resolution that was passed in December 2018 that requested staff to look into recommendations to improve voter turnout. So in the 2018 municipal election, voter turnout in Sault Ste. Marie was 40.3%. While the provincial average was 40 to 45% for the period 1988 to 2014, we have, when we've mined deeper into the data, it appears that municipalities in the 50,000 to 100,000 population range actually had more like a 35% voter turnout. And historically, Sault Ste. Marie's voters have, we've had a greater turnout than most of our comparators. However, 40.3% is certainly a number we would like to see increase. We have been looking at statistics from the 2018 municipal election in terms of what the voter turnout was for each ward, as well as how the breakdown in terms of age of voters and so on, what that data tells us, so that we can tailor our communications and engagement initiatives to the population that hasn't been coming out to vote. As well, in late March 2021, there was a council resolution passed requesting staff to investigate and report with respect to vote by mail, which is an alternative voting mechanism that we would be investigating anyway. And certainly the pandemic has exacerbated the need to look at an alternative voting method such as that. So that will be reported upon with all of the results from our survey and engagement initiative.
Great, thank you, Rachel. I'll next pass it along to Madison Zupa, Deputy City Clerk with the City of Sault Ste. Marie. Madison, over to you.
Thank you, Tessa, and good afternoon to our attendees. This slide is going to provide a broad overview of voting methods, and that's how you would cast your ballot. So first, you have in-person manual count. That is where eligible voters physically attend a specified voting location to cast their ballot. Once the ballot is given to the voter, their name is struck off the voters list. Once the ballot is cast, it's placed into a secure box for manual counting once voting is closed. Next, in-person tabulator count. Similar to the manual count, you attend a specified voting location. However, there are a few differences. Once the ballot is given to the voter, their name is struck off the voters list. Once the ballot is marked, the voter then feeds the ballot into a tabulator. The tabulator scans and interprets the ballot, and the vote is cast. The ballot is deposited into a secure ballot box, and the tabulator provides a cumulative total of all votes cast once voting is closed. Vote by mail. Now we're getting into some of the remote voting options. So vote by mail is where eligible voters receive a ballot package in the mail that includes instructions, a voter declaration card, a ballot, a secrecy folder, and a postage prepaid return envelope. Once it's returned, the voter's name is struck off the voters list, and the secrecy envelope containing the ballot is placed into a secure ballot box until voting day. Votes may be counted manually or by use of tabulators once voting is closed. Vote by phone is where eligible voters cast their vote by calling a designated telephone number. Voters receive a PIN and may require to answer security questions. Once validated, an audio version of the ballot is presented to the voter. Once the selection is made and confirmed, the vote is cast and the voter's name is struck off the list. Once voting is closed, the results are generated and provided to the clerk. Vote online is where eligible voters cast their vote on a specified website. Voters receive voting credentials, including an identification number and PIN, and use them to receive an electronic ballot. The voter makes their selection and casts their ballot over the internet. Once the ballot is cast, the voter's name is struck off the voters list. Once voting is closed, the results are generated and provided to the city clerk. And Vote from Home was a program that was introduced by the City of Sault Ste. Marie in the 2018 municipal election and allowed voters to vote from their home. So eligible voters could register for this service and a ballot box would be brought to their house. It was a very successful program that provided greater accessibility to voters, or for voters. And in 2018, 66 voters participated in the Vote from Home program. So we're just going to draw your attention to some benefits and drawbacks. And these are high-level benefits and drawbacks. And we are doing greater research on all of the different voting methods. And we'll provide this information back to council at a later date. But in-person benefits is where election staff can verify voter identification in person. It's tradition. And many of the people in Sault Ste. Marie are familiar with it and have used this method of voting in the past. And because there's a physical ballot, a manual recount is possible. The in-person drawbacks can include Accessible and available locations are becoming more scarce and harder to find as some locations close. The scarcity of locations is increasing. Potential for spoiled ballots. The staffing levels, the staffing resources that are needed to administer an in-person election are quite high, and the staff availability to fill those roles are also becoming more scarce. Time constraints. So there are certain specific times that you have to attend the voting location to vote. So there are advanced polls and in-person polls on voting day, but they are restricted to certain time periods. And the timing of the results, certainly with a manual count, can be slightly delayed due to the manual nature of counting the ballots. So vote by mail, the benefits include increased accessibility to eligible voters. You no longer require proxy voting, and a manual recount is possible because of the physical ballots. Some of the drawbacks from vote by mail: the ballots could be lost or damaged through the through the mail process. Potential for spoiled ballots when they are returned to us, and once the counting begins, you could find spoiled ballots in the mix if they're inaccurately marked or couldn't be interpreted. There's time constraints, and by this, there is a specific time period to return the ballot being postmarked on a certain date. However, we were also, as we were reading the information, sometimes you may end up voting before a candidate might get to your door or before a debate happens. So we need to be mindful of that. And the timing of the results, again, and similar to in-person, if it's manual count, there could be more time required to actually count the ballots and post the results of the election. Benefits of vote by phone. Now you'll find in this slide the benefits and drawbacks from vote by phone and vote online are quite similar. There are a few differences, but because they're often offered together, there are similar benefits and drawbacks. So vote by phone, the benefits: increased accessibility to eligible voters. Again, no requirement for proxy voting. Flexible timing, so it's a 24/7 opportunity to vote when it's convenient for the voter. Fewer spoiled ballots, as there's checks and balances in place to ensure that no overvoting has happened. And there's also confirmation of your vote. So there's fewer spoiled ballots, or potential for fewer spoiled ballots. And the results are fast and accurate after the voting is completed. There's a digital audit trail, and it's a familiar technology to many people with use of telephones in your home or mobile devices. The drawbacks of potential frustration: there's things that could result in frustration. A number of candidates could be long. The list of potential candidates could be long. The sound or the pronunciation of names could be challenging. There could be technical difficulties if there's an influx of call volumes to the phone line. Security concerns, and there's no manual recount possible because there's no physical ballot. Online benefits, again, increased accessibility to eligible voters. And these remote options don't require anyone to come into a polling station. So that's helpful for increased accessibility. No proxy voting required. Flexible timing, again, a 24/7 voting time frame. So you can vote at your convenience during specified, overall time frames. Fewer spoiled ballots, fast and accurate results similar to the vote by phone, and a digital audit trail. One drawback around potential frustration is not being comfortable with the technology or digital literacy, and also not everyone has access to the internet. You could have technical difficulties, as we've seen in previous elections in 2018. Some communities had technical difficulties with online voting. Security concerns, and again, no manual recount possible as there are no physical ballots. So the reason that we are specifically looking at remote voting options, first and foremost, the global pandemic has certainly brought it to the forefront, but that's not the only reason. Exploring remote voting options is something that we can do at any given election through the planning process. For other concerns, like health concerns by voters who may not be able to attend in-person locations, accessibility, mobility issues, but also other accessible concerns. If you own property in Sault Ste. Marie, but you don't live in Sault Ste. Marie, it gives you an option to vote. And if you're out of town for work or school, but you live in Sault Ste. Marie, then that also gives you an opportunity to vote. And speaking of accessibility, Nancy Scott will be speaking to that in greater detail in the upcoming slides.
Great, thank you, Madison. And with that, I will introduce Nancy Scott, our accessibility coordinator, who is going to discuss some in-person accessible locations and transportation. So Nancy, over to you.
Thank you, Tessa. I'm very happy to be involved with this voter engagement session to provide information and to receive input on accessibility in our municipal elections. First, I'll speak to what we do. Training. Election workers receive accessibility training, that being accessible customer service training and training on the accessibility tools available for voters that can remove barriers to casting ballots. Locations. City staff assesses polling locations to ensure locations are barrier-free, taking into consideration parking, doorway widths, and at-grade entry doors. If there is not an automatic opener on the entry door, an election worker will be present at the door to open it for voters as needed. Transportation, we assist in transportation on election day by providing free transit rides. That includes conventional buses and parabus service. Pre and post-election input. City clerk staff attends an accessibility advisory committee meeting prior to the election to present an overview of the election process, focusing on accessibility, and receives input from the committee. Also, post-election feedback is forwarded to the city clerk. Now, how can we improve access to voting? On the locations, we want to know if community members experienced physical barrier locations in the past and what those barriers were. And also, are there other barriers experienced by community members in past municipal elections? Now we should consider the other voting methods. The different voting methods were outlined today in this session. Consider these options. What voting method would best remove your barrier to participation in the election process? In closing, I'd like to remind community members of the ways to report barriers within the City of Sault Ste. Marie owned and operated buildings, facilities, and services. You can contact the direct department in question directly. You can contact me, the accessibility coordinator, or you can fill out the report a barrier fillable form that's on the City of Sault Ste. Marie website. Thank you for your attention today.
And to wrap things up, the other considerations that we're going to be looking at in addition to community engagement and feedback are some of the things that we've talked about over the course of the presentation: integrity of the process, security of the ballot, access to the voting methods, as Nancy just described, the overall administration of the election process, and costs as well to deliver the election. So those are some of the things that we are going to be looking at, and certainly welcome feedback on other items for consideration.
Great, thank you. And this concludes the formal portion of our agenda. I would now like to open it up for questions and comments from any of our participants today. We'll just give them a chance to come in, but I do have a few questions that I received online that I could just read from our online platforms here. So the first question I have here is, in your experience, what reasons have residents indicated for not voting? So maybe we'll start with Rachel on that one.
I mean, it is a difficult thing to quantify, particularly given the principles of secrecy and confidentiality, right? We have, I mean, and you could tell statistically that it's a problem, and not only here across the province municipally, but also provincially and federally. And We think that there's a level of voter apathy. We're kind of excited to be able to dig into the statistical data that we have in terms of the ages and geographical locations of the people who are voting, or more importantly, are not. So that, as I said, we have various channels to communicate, to encourage that participation. And as well, I think the results of this process hopefully will inform that and improve voter turnout. Madison?
Yeah, I think those are all really great points, Rachel. And I think there are some other things as I've been doing the research and reading, and I can't quantify it at this point in time with the local data, but certainly some things that have come up in the reading and research, or perhaps not knowing what candidates stand for, or not relating to particular candidates, or maybe just not even awareness in general of the election and the process and how to get registered and that sort of thing. So I mean, certainly locally we do our best to communicate that, but certainly in every election we're looking at ways to improve the communication to those voters who maybe don't have all the information they need. Nancy, if you wanted to add in as well.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Madison. And from what I've heard, remote voting makes it much easier for people with disabilities. And of course, disabilities is a broad spectrum. Much easier for people with disabilities to be able to participate in the election process. It's easier for them to do it from home or by mail. They're not always able to get out or get transportation, in spite of what we do as a city to assist in those things. I think generally it's thought that the remote voting would best serve people with disabilities.
Yeah, I mean, even something as simple too as, the weather. I know in the last election, one of the advanced voting polls, we had a lower turnout because there was a flood happening in the community. So, things that the weather could predict voter turnout in some cases, if it's too cold, if it's too slippery, if it's too wet. So there's a lot of factors that go into reasons why people, are not voting. Another question here that we have is, have other municipalities in Ontario utilized alternative voting methods such as voting by mail, over the phone, or online? Have either of you had some research into that?
Yes, certainly I can start off on this one. Part of the engagement process and part of what we're doing right now is researching what other communities are doing and what the best practices have been across those communities. Certainly voting methods are different in different communities. Rural communities and large urban communities use different voting methods. In a survey that was completed by AMCTO after the election in 2018, it was clear the trends are moving towards voting online and internet voting, but there still are a lot of municipalities using paper ballots, both using manual counts and tabulators. It's about 50-50 for paper ballots and internet voting. And then vote by mail is also an option for many communities. So what we want to do is take a look at what's been successful. Have there been trends with increased voter turnout based on the alternative voting method? And also some of the municipalities are doing them in conjunction. So you might have paper ballots and a remote voting option as well. So we're going to see what that looks like from other communities and see if it would apply here.
Yeah, great. I'm looking for some more questions there. I don't see any, so I'll just continue with the ones that we have online here. A really great question, just because of the fact that we are looking at alternative voting methods. So what measures would be put in place to ensure the electoral integrity is achieved through alternative voting methods? I think that's a question on a lot of people's minds as we go into alternative methods and alternative ways to cast a ballot.
Maybe Madison, I'll start off and then you can fill in.
Sure.
The integrity of the vote is always paramount, and I think that there are challenges no matter which voting method you adopt. And certainly legislatively, there are provisions that preserve or back up sort of the preservation of the integrity of the vote. As well, we have developed internal processes for paper ballot manual count and are examining processes for alternative voting methods. And before I hand it over to Madison, I guess I would just underscore what I had said earlier, which is that at the end of the day, the onus is on the voter.
No, that's great information. And I think I would just add that like you were saying, in each of these voting methods, there are benefits and drawbacks. Security concerns are raised with the remote voting, much to do with voter identification. And I think you addressed that in your protocols and procedures in the design of the system to try to mitigate any of those concerns. And you have protocols and procedures to follow if in the event that you encounter something different, right? So any situation you're gonna try to have a protocol and procedure for, and if you don't, we have integrity of our election staff as well to be able to work through any challenges that come up on election night or voting night.
Okay, great. Now I had one more question here that came through online. The last question I have here is, if the city does decide to move forward with one of the 3 identified alternative voting methods, would there be an opportunity to explore implementing further methods in the future? Any other methods that may come about this discussion?
Absolutely. I mean, that's always up for discussion, right? And if you see what happened with some of our colleagues who experienced difficulties with, exclusive internet voting, for instance, in 2018, and they've made modifications for 2022. So making one decision now does not mean that's the decision forever. It can always, as long as the legislation provides the opportunities to explore those, it could be re-examined, and I would think probably would be, right? And recommendations made on a go forward basis, depending on what the circumstances are. I mean, I'm not convinced that we'd be looking at alternative voting methods with the same lens in 2021, looking at the 2022 election, were it not for the COVID-19 pandemic, for instance. Madison, you probably have more to add.
I mean, I've been looking at documents and council reports going back to the early 2000s and seeing how communities have evolved over time as well. So we're looking at the best practices, not only municipalities in our in Ontario and also across Canada. We're looking at the evolution of elections over time. And certainly it's something interesting to see how the decisions have been made, what considerations there have been, and each election you have to review if what's working is in fact working, or if tweaks need to be made or adaptations need to happen because things are changing. Like we're seeing, the trends to internet voting are there, but the security standards and the protocols are being developed and refined also. So, and we're also keeping an eye on the provincial and federal jurisdictions and their election methods too, to see how they're evolving. So absolutely, I think we've learned over time that things are always changing. So
great. Well, thank you. I don't have any more questions from the online audience, and I don't see any questions here from our participants today. So I do want to thank everyone for their engagement and participating in this discussion this afternoon. We certainly do appreciate it. Please continue to provide us with feedback at saultmarie.ca/election. And note that all of the feedback that we gather throughout the engagement process will be considered as part of the 2022 municipal election planning process. So thank you again to everyone for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.